thank you all for being here. So just as a, let everybody know, so why am I here today? The goal of this is I want to give practical tips on recruitment for UX researchers working or looking to work at B2B companies. So I started at my B2B company, Braze, about a year and a half ago. And before that, I was mostly B2C. So I had a lot of learning to do, and I want to share that. So for example, when I first started recruiting for a big project, I was scouring the internet for tips on recruiting, how to recruit B2B, because I was having some trouble and I couldn't find any. So through trial and error, I figured out what worked, what didn't work, and yeah, I wanted to share it with others experiencing the same issues. So I've already talked about this a little bit on a podcast, and I'm happy to put it together in a presentation so it's a little more tangible for people. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting challenges in B2B, which I'll discuss today. But first, a little bit about me. I know Lauren already mentioned a little bit about this, but like I said, I work at Braze, and Braze is a customer engagement platform that allows brands such as Burger King, HBO Max, Venmo, just to name a few, to orchestrate and send cross-channel marketing campaigns. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. So an example is if you've ever received a push notification, an email, maybe a text message from Venmo, that was likely powered by Braze. So yeah, and at Braze, I'm a UX research manager, and our team is small, about 6, but it is growing. So yeah. And just a little bit about my background. So I originally started in academia, specifically sociology. And from there, I moved into the private sector. I worked at a company, WillowTree, which is a mobile app development agency. So I had a consulting background there. And then I wanted to get a little more background in-house. So I worked at Etsy for about 2.5 years. So got that e-commerce background. Then I wanted a new challenge, which is working at a business-to-business company where Braze. And you could see just some what I love to do when I'm not at work. I live in the New York City area. Right now I'm in Virginia, but I typically live in the New York City area. So I love trying new restaurants, exploring new neighborhoods, etc. But I'm also just as happy staying home and catching up on House of Dragon, for example, which I guess just had their finale on Sunday. So cool. And before I go into this, a quick note of vocabulary, because I'm throwing out words like B2B, etc., just for people who aren't aware. So what do we mean by all these terms? So B2B, B2C, enterprise, SaaS, a lot of different terms here and just throwing them around. So note of vocabulary, B2B stands for business to business, and it's software that is made to enable other companies to do their work. And the people working at that company, the end users are the people working at that company. So for example, Braze is a B2B, Amplitude, Salesforce, there's numerous other companies like that. And then B2C, which most people probably already know, it's business to customer. So software that is made to enable people like you and me to live their lives. So shopping on Walmart is B2C, shopping on Etsy, Amazon, although they might have some B2B sides too, primarily they're consumer focused. And then enterprise. So how I interpret this is a segment of B2B. So all enterprise software is B2B, but not all B2B software is enterprise, kind of like the bourbon whiskey analogy. So the biggest difference here is in the size of the company that the software serves. So Braze would be considered enterprise because we serve a lot of big enterprise clients. But let's not get too hung up on the language. Also, SaaS refers to software as a service. So kind of use that interchangeably as well. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'll use B2B to refer to SaaS and enterprise, or just try to use the word B2B mostly. Cool, so turning it over to the issues with B2B recruitment. So here's the obstacles I'm going to present today. So I'll walk through each one of these and then follow up with my solutions. So again, a lot of the solutions I talk about are practical tips to enable you to be more efficient with participant recruitment. All right, the first one here, your pool of users is limited. It's the first obstacle. So I would say this is the biggest obstacle in B2B recruitment. You have a limited pool of users compared to B2C anyway. For example, at my company, Braze, which I'll use that as an example a lot because it's what I know, we have over 1,000 customers. And by that, I mean companies worldwide. And that sounds like a lot, but when you compare it to a B2C company like Walmart, you quickly realize that it's a very small amount of customers compared to those. So you have fewer users to recruit. And with that, you're likely to recruit users who've already participated in research sessions, sometimes recently. And I'll talk about this a little more later, but our designers and our product managers are also recruiting customers themselves for their own research. And if you want to avoid repeatedly talking to the same users, this presents a little bit of a problem. So with a smaller pool of customers, it can also be difficult if you want to recruit a specific type of customer. So not just anybody, but you want a specific type. So for example, Braze is a pretty powerful, complex platform. It has a lot of features and quite a few different types of people who use it. And our primary, I guess you could call it persona, I know it's a loaded word, but I'll just use it here, is marketer. But we also serve developers. So for example, when a company buys Braze, they'll have developers come in and integrate it with other types of technology they have. So basically integrate it with their tech stack. And we may want to talk to them as researchers about their experience integrating our platform, talk to developers. However, the number of developers using Braze is even smaller than the number of marketers, our typical persona. And to be honest, developers are even less engaged because they're not active in the platform day to day. So they're even harder to reach and harder to get interested in talking to us. So those are the key ones. But generally, what if you want to recruit a specific type of marketer, for example? Say one that works at a medium-sized company and is located in the APAC or Asia region. It's even more difficult to recruit then. So what do? All right, so this sounds pretty common sense, but I'll go into more detail. You got to get creative with your recruitment. So my overall strategy is, getting creative and meeting users where they already are. So first, ask yourself, what tools does your company use to get user feedback already? Or what tools can you implement, hopefully in a lightweight way, to connect to your users? I've listed some tools in the ways we use at Braze, the ones we use at Braze to recruit, and I'll go into more detail in a moment so you can see how we use these in action. Second, you might want to create a research program with an actual panel of users to do continuous feedback. And third, a creative way to recruit is using outside panels, like, for example, user interviews or Responded.io in order to get lookalike users. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little more detail. So talking about the creative ways, like to get people, so getting user feedback, meeting people where they are. The first one you might want to look at is intercept surveys, leveraging those. So just in case people aren't aware, an intercept survey is a quick survey that pops up while a user is actively using your product. So for example, I'm sure we've all experienced them, like you're on a website, you all of a sudden get a little pop-up, hey, how's your experience today? Hey, things like that. Or you might be on Instagram and you get a survey that pops up. They're usually to collect feedback on a feature or the overall experience of your product. If you have access to the answers and the customers who provided them, it's a great way to recruit. You can reach out to them. So at Braze, for example, we have quite a few customer satisfaction surveys we send out. You can see one on the right here. We have them running in our platform for different types of features that we're rolling out to measure how satisfied users are with the feature. And sometimes we also allow customers to provide open-ended feedback in those surveys. And these are the users that I look for and try to recruit the most. And my hypothesis being, if they're likely to leave an open-ended response, they're more likely to respond to my request for a research session. And also, I tend to reach out to the people who are a little more dissatisfied with the platform, because I imagine they have a lot more they might want to share. So this has been a useful tool. And these don't have to be surveys. If you have access to this already, this is just something that might be a source for your recruitment. But if you have access to doing these yourselves, they don't have to be a survey. You could use them for recruitment yourself. So for example, like I've used this particularly at Braze when we have the functionality in our platform to send an intercept, but there are other tools that you can use, like Qualtrics can do intercepts if you have access to that. And there are probably countless other ones that you can use, maybe some free versions. So you can send intercepts and maybe recruit directly. So send a message, hey, would you be interested in talking about XYZ? Sign up here to participate. So talk to your team about what tools already exist or what tools you might be able to use. And if you're not sure which teams to talk to, I would say a good starting point is your product team or maybe your customer support team. Another example of a product that we use is called Product Board. And I have no interest in Product Board. I don't work for them, have it, just something we use, and I wanted to provide it as an example. I'm sure there's other programs that do the same. But it allows users to give feedback on the product itself directly from the platform. A little different than an intercept survey in the fact that this is an actual product. Users can, like on their own, click on something and give active feedback on whatever it is. The feedback is mostly very specific, which you could see on the example on the right. And I've removed some of the information, but you could see they're talking about a lot of stuff specific to Braze and specific to sending campaigns. So it's really great if you want to recruit users based on very specific problems they've experienced or wishes they've expressed. So again, this might be, and it's a pretty cool tool to actually, find patterns in, and you could actively recruit those specific users if that's a problem you're having. Finally, out of this, I would say a more lightweight way to recruit is to target users in their online communities. Perhaps you have a Slack workspace where your users are talking with each other. So at Braze, we have a Slack community of Braze users called Braze Bonfire. And the purpose of this is for users, our customers, to gather and connect with each other, share things, but it's also a really good source for recruiting. And in some cases, outside of recruiting, it's a really good source for doing a digital ethnography, analyzing the interactions between users and how they solve their own problems. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Keep in mind, the caveat is these members are often highly engaged users. So just keep that in mind, be wary of bias. But in the absence of other ways to recruit, you're up against a deadline, you're really having trouble, this can be a great resource. Your company doesn't have to have an active Slack channel that they run, though. Maybe there's a Reddit page or a Google group where your people are talking about your company. Maybe there's a Slack channel run by your users that you don't even know about. So this isn't a B2B piece, but recently I was just looking at you need a budget and curious about things about that and read a bunch of stuff in Reddit threads, people interacting there. So I guarantee that there probably is a resource out there where you can try to recruit people that way. So another way to deal with your limited pool of users is to create a research program. And what I mean by a research program is it includes a set number of participants who participate in multiple research sessions to give continuous feedback. It's especially helpful in iterative product development. So not only do you get feedback in real time, the biggest, for our purposes, thing that it helps with, it greatly reduces recruitment overhead. So you're not having to recruit users over and over, but you can recruit a set number of users and then get their feedback as you progress with the product. Say you're developing a certain type of feature from beta, alpha, beta to general audience. It could be great for that. So these types of programs are best suited for research that includes both generative big questions and you're doing some evaluative methods. And at Braze, because we have trouble with recruitment, we do this quite often. It's been pretty successful. Again, with the caveat that you are talking to the same people again and again, but it's really helpful when you want to get just lightweight feedback on something that you're working on iteratively. And finally, and I think this is my most exciting one that I've done, If you're having trouble recruiting users, recruit lookalike users. So lookalike users are users who fit the same user profile as your users, but don't actually use your software. So maybe they use a competitor. You also get the added benefit of getting users unfamiliar with your platform, which can be great, so you get a pair of fresh eyes on your product. So for a recent research project I worked on, I had a big challenge with recruiting. I wanted specific types of users, new users, to measure how intuitive and usable Braze was. Basically, I wanted to establish a benchmark. But as I said, we have a small pool of users, and trying to find new users to our platform was even harder. I think I got a total of 2 out of, I'm not even sure how many. And also, to be honest, we really don't want to bombard new users immediately with research requests. They were onboarding. Our platform takes a little while to onboard, so we didn't want to bombard them. So I ended up recruiting lookalike users. In my example, it was marketers who were familiar with the term lifecycle marketing, work in that field, and they were familiar with some of the tools that enabled them to do their jobs. But they were unfamiliar with Braze as a platform. Maybe they use something like Salesforce or something else. And this became a proxy for me for new Braze customers. And there's plenty of outside panels where you can recruit these types of professional users. One that I mentioned already, user interviews, is a service I've used a few times, and I've had really good results with it. Again, I'm not paid by user interviews. I'm just sharing what I've had that's been really helpful. So user interviews allows you to target by job title, industry, company size, and a host of other criteria you can see here. And you can also add screener logic to allow for even more targeted recruiting. It's also pretty seamless to use. Once you set up and launch your study, you get a list of participants who you can select to participate in whatever study you want. You get to see all their responses, etc. And the turnaround is super fast, and it's super easy to message participants and pay them incentives once they've completed the study. But the best part is the turnaround, where it was taking me weeks to recruit. I got turnaround in 24 hours and got a lot of people that fit my criteria, and it was great. And just to share some practical tips on if you wanted to do lookalike, you wanted to recruit lookalike users, what I did is I asked a few articulation questions just to truly see if they fit our recruitment profile. So walk me through a typical day at your job. What's your job title? What are your responsibilities? Because we have a lot of different titles out there on marketing, I didn't want to give a long list, but wanted to hear in their own words. I also asked what platforms they used or currently use. And they were allowed to select as many as they liked. So you can see here this list. These are some of the people that have similar offerings to Braze. And one trick, and hopefully you can find this useful, is I ended up making up a product name just to make sure I was getting people who were serious about the study. And this was kind of fun because all these platforms already have such interesting names, MailChimp, OneSignal, whatever. So I just made up a random name of a platform, and if they ended up selecting that they used it, they would get rejected from the study. So it was great to really get honed in on the particular type of person I was looking for. Cool. So the next obstacle I'm going to talk about is that you're not the only touch point with the user. So this one is just a useful thing to know. So I mentioned this already, but your product managers, designers, and sales organization may also be talking to your users. In the case of product managers and designers, and maybe some others, recruiting, you as a UX researcher may not have full visibility into the users they're recruiting. Are they recruiting the same users over and over? Are they just relying on that? Are they getting a lot of biased feedback that way? This could present a problem. And also, working in enterprise B2B often means working with sales. And specifically, I'm going to talk about customer success. So if you work with customer success managers, this may be familiar. I see some waving, so maybe that's, yeah, cool. So organizations like mine typically have customer success managers and other salespeople like account managers that interact and meet with users or customers on a regular basis. And sometimes, and it depends on your organization, there can be a little bit of gatekeeping that happens. This is not necessarily a bad thing. It just creates a little bit of overhead. So at my company, it's not necessary to go through success to gain access to users, but for certain types of customers, say bigger ones that might be coming up on a renewal, ones that are generally just more sensitive to talk to, you may need to involve success. And like I said, that will add some overhead to your recruiting time. And again, some customer success managers just want to be present in your research sessions. They're meeting with these customers day in, like bi-weekly or weekly, and they just feel like they have a lot of context and they want to be there. And while others, have less involvement and they just want to be kept in the loop or CC'd on your email if you recruit that way. And some might want to reach out to the customers themselves for various reasons, which can also slow down your recruitment. So the gatekeeping part is probably one of the more interesting challenges, and to talk about how I solve for this. First, I would say it's to your advantage to keep success in the loop. Yes, it does add a little overhead, but you're more likely to get quality results. So you can use success managers to make warm introductions. If you just send a cold email outreach, you're less likely to get a response. But if you have your success manager reach out, you might be more likely to get them to participate, your users, that is. And you can even ask, and I've found this helpful, ask your success managers in their weekly or bi-weekly meetings with the users to invite customers for research sessions. More likely to respond and be open to it if it's in a one-on-one meeting, face-to-face. And second, define a process for managing recruitment when working with success. So in your organization, and I've heard this from a few people, you may not be able to talk to your customers without going through success managers. And that's okay. If that's the case, work with your success leadership to create a way for you to communicate your research needs to all the success managers. So at Braze, for example, if we do have a research request and we want to go through success, we fill out a form that goes to all of success leadership with all our details and what kind of customers we're looking for. I use the word customers and users interchangeably here. So if you hear that, that's just what I'm doing, because we often call them that at Braze. So the form gets sent to all the success leadership. And because they often have insight into what the success managers, which clients they're working with, et cetera, they'll then reach out to their direct reports and locate people who would be helpful to solve your specific needs. And that's a great way. And it's also pretty automated. So you don't have to reach out individually to people, figure out which success managers work with which of your users, et cetera. It's possible that your research team handles all recruitment, in which case you don't have to worry about this. You can just skip over this. But however, if you do, like we do at Braze, where we do have to worry about this, make sure to establish guidelines and guardrails for your product manager and design colleagues and whoever else is recruiting customers to talk to for research sessions. So at Braze, we have guidelines that we have posted and we share often on when to recruit, for example, via product board versus via our Slack group. For our Slack group, we say these are for one-off, very quick research needs because we don't want to always be recruiting people who are very engaged. We also provide templates for user outreach to make it easier, make sure the wording is correct, make sure people don't have to reinvent the wheel each time and they're coming up with different types of outreach that may or may not be helpful in getting participants. In addition, define some guardrails, such as how often you should reach out to certain users. And I'll admit, this is hard. It's still something we're working on in my organization too. It's a little more easy to do in B2C companies where you can set frequency capping to I will not contact this customer after 6 months after being contacted once every 6 months or once every year or something like that. A little harder to do with a smaller pool, but we're working these kinks out, and it's certainly something important and something that's on our mind. All right, next one. Your users are busy professionals, our third obstacle. So this might come as no surprise, and we're all in this field, but we're all busy. So they have limited time to help you with your research project. It's just something to keep in mind. They're working all day in your product. At least my company, there's some people, that's their job. They're in my product every day, all day. They're less likely to want to talk to me after hours or before work hours about something that they're doing at work all the time. So again, what do I do to solve this problem? So ask yourself, does my study really need to be an hour? Does it need to be an hour and a half? If you're conducting interviews, for example, I've found that I've had way more luck recruiting users for a study that could be 30 minutes or 45 minutes versus an hour and a half. Yes, there are cases where you need the full hour, totally, and I've done that myself. But ask yourself, is this something I can do in a shorter amount of time? So be ruthless about that. It'll really save you in the long run. Rather have more users and maybe have to do a separate research session later than have like 2 people that signed up for my hour-long study. So, and again, this one's probably common sense, but remember to meet people where they are and when they're working. So at Braze, we're a global company. So I usually set my availability a little bit earlier in the morning, a little bit later in the evening, so I can accommodate people from different time zones, which I find really helpful. I don't go all in the hours of the night, of course, but just be a little more accommodating. And remember, you're international. If you have international users, they're part of your study. They should be part of your study. Another solution, and this is a very simple, easy, lightweight one, to reduce the friction it takes to sign up for a study. So if your company has Calendly, for example, like we do, in your email outreach or intercept survey, offer a direct link for users to schedule a session with you. So they can easily just see this, click on the link, sign up, it matches with your schedule, boom, you have a research session. None of the back and forth, makes it super easy. Of course, this only works if you've already pre-screened participants. If not, you may want to pair your link, your Calendly link or whatever service with a screener survey. And I mentioned Calendly, but there's tons of other tools out there that are free to use as well. So look around, give it a try, and see if it helps you get more participants. All right, final one, then I have some bonus tips. Incentives are not always accepted or acceptable for that matter. So just to set the stage, my philosophy is we should incentivize people in research sessions because we should pay people for their time. So that's where I start. But because you're talking to users working in other companies, sometimes big companies, your users may be wary to accept an incentive. Why? So I've had people tell me they can't receive gifts for whatever reason, like it's against their company policy. And this could be a problem. I didn't realize this at first. They might be less likely to sign up for your study if you're offering an incentive. So first, this is not to say you shouldn't offer incentives and throw them out, throw the baby out with the bathwater or whatever that expression is. If you can, you should. And one solution I found to this problem of whether an incentive is a gift is I've been able to offer gift cards to a charity of their choice, and that makes it less likely that they will have that issue. And Tremendous is a great service that offers like a range of gift cards, including these. You could also, in your recruitment emails, add a disclaimer about participating without receiving an incentive, just to not scare people off that might want to sign up, but feel like they can't because of the incentive. Note, just make sure to check with your legal team on all these things because it can get a little tricky. So say you can't offer incentives. There's no budget, your company is too small or doesn't believe in doing them, which is a whole nother topic maybe, but say you just can't offer incentives for whatever reason. I would say it's not the end of the world. From my experience, B2B users are really invested in your product. And I would say you would be too if you were in it all day. And they're invested and want to make it better. So I've had people at Braze tell me at the end of a session, oh, don't even send me the gift card. I'm just happy that I was able to participate. Never really heard that in a B2C environment. I've heard that a few times. So these are people who could receive gifts. It wasn't a problem for them. So we found that our users are really happy to be part of improving the platform because it makes their life easier day to day. All right. Finally, just some bonus tips. These, I would say, I included them here because they apply to B2B, but also to B2C. But I wanted to share them anyway because I think they're valuable. So, not sure if your email outreach or intercept messages are getting users' attention? A/B test. A/B test your copy. So, I won't go into too much detail, but develop a hypothesis for which test will do better and why. So, an example might be, should I include the incentive amount in the subject line of my email, or should I not? Will I get more people that way? Maybe I want to play with the subject line wording or the body of the email wording one way or another. And all of this, just as a general rule, try to avoid language that looks like spam. And you can find a lot of articles out there which will, give you some guidance on that. And finally, if you can also manually A/B test, like, I don't know if A/B test is the right word here, but whether an email or intercept messaging works better for you. Is cold outreach working better? Is an intercept working better? Is a warm outreach from a success manager working better than your cold outreach? You can play around and see what works better, and you can optimize your recruiting going forward. And finally, if your company allows you to recruit customers without going through success managers, find self-service ways to get the information you need. So you may already have this, but if you don't, your BI, business intelligence, or analytics team can help you with this. And also, don't forget about your customer support teams, the technical support, or whatever they're called, customer support, technical support. They triage support requests all the time, and they're often pretty big in B2B companies. And they often see patterns of issues that go on, but they might be able to, they might be a great source for reaching out for users to recruit from. I've had pretty good success with this too, like asking someone, hey, have you had a lot of issues with or customers talking about X problem? Do you have a list of those customers? And I can reach out that way. Cool. So in summary, the first obstacle, your pool of users is limited. So what are the solutions? Get creative with recruitment. Create a research program. You'll greatly reduce recruitment overhead doing this. And leverage lookalike audiences. Second is you're not the only touch point with your user, but use customer success to your advantage here and establish guidelines and guardrails for your colleagues also doing recruitment that applies to you. Third, your users are busy professionals. So schedule shorter sessions. Seems common sense, but it really does make a big difference. And offer a direct link to sessions, which will reduce the friction overall in getting people to sign up. Fourth, incentives may not always be accepted or acceptable for your users. But I find incentives still to be helpful if they can be accepted. And you could do this by offering a gift card to a charity of their choice, say they can't receive incentives. Also, if you can't, B2B users are really invested in making your product better, so it's not the end of the world. And then finally, I know I just covered this, so I'll run through bonus tips: A/B test your copy, leverage other teams in your organization to help you do more self-service. Great, and I would love feedback on this overall. So I have a link, I'll drop it in the chat and you can fill that out, but that is it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Everybody give Matthew a round of applause. That was excellent. Super organized, laid out. I love the way that you had the simple tips. So thank you for that, Matthew.
Absolutely.
We did have a bunch of questions in the chat. If you have more, keep them coming. I also think Anthony dropped a survey link, if you do have to drop, but we'd love some feedback on tonight's event as well. So definitely make sure you fill out Matthew's as well as our UX research and strategy one. But I'll just get into some of the questions from folks. The first one that came in is, how much success have you had recruiting from your online community? And can you fill an entire recruit at Braze that way?
Yeah, so we've had pretty good success here, but again, I would say it's not for a big research study. It's really, I would say we use it as a last resort, like we're really having trouble recruiting, and we need people, whether we're up against a deadline or we just need some quick feedback. It's been useful there, but we haven't been able, usually it's like it augments the study that we have. We just want to get a few more people. We already have some people we've recruited via email or something else. Also, sometimes we'll just post a quick survey just to get a pulse check on something, which will help us. That's less about recruiting, but more about like getting some sort of research insights, but very lightweight, used to augment studies overall.
On average, how long would you say it typically takes you to recruit for a full study just using your your internal B2B community?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had trouble measuring this. I usually say 2 weeks, but I've had it take 3 weeks, sometimes a little longer. It took me longer when I first started, before I recognized like kind of these better and worse ways to do things. So I would say on average about 2 weeks. If you're doing lookalike customers, that's pretty quick. You can get that 24 to 48 hours. But if you're trying to recruit your own panel of users, I would say give yourself 2 weeks. And if you have to go through customer success, you might want to tack on a little bit more time there because they're busy too.
Speaking of lookalike users, there was a question in the chat on, can you tell us more about lookalike users? What are the pros and cons of selecting those over real users, and just a little more about that?
Yeah, I would say this is also, well, two things. I'd say it's also a last resort. You really can't get your customers, especially if you're trying to test a new product feature or something that they don't have the experience with. They're not going to be the right types of people. It's more generative research, I would say. Lookalike users can be helpful. So for me, my project was really establishing a benchmark for the usability of our platform. That's why I wanted new users, getting existing customers who've used Braze for a year, 2 plus 5 years, just wasn't going to really give me, there's a lot of memorability bias built in, and I didn't really want that. So in that case, it was really helpful to get those people. But yeah, it doesn't apply in all cases. I would say the other option would be if you have a pretty, general research question that doesn't require you to get too specific in a particular part of your platform, a feature, but a kind of an open-ended problem space that might apply across these types of platforms, these types of competitors.
Yeah, so considering your research question and making sure that lookalike users actually match what you're trying to.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Question in the chat about, how many times is too many to talk to the same users or participants? I know with a smaller pool that can happen more. And, what's your guidance around that?
Yeah, that's, like I said, something we're working out right now because we have everyone in our organization or everyone in our product organization doing recruitment. It's a little hard to figure that out right now. I would say if you're doing a research program with people actively participating in multiple sessions, that's okay. Especially because you're focusing on one kind of core problem and you're developing the product with them in mind. It's kind of a co-creation activity in some senses. But I would say in the past when I worked for B2C, 6 months to a year was great for like contacting, or if a customer participated in the session, I wouldn't want to talk to them for another year. Can't really be the case in B2B. We're still working that out, but I would love if we could do like, hey, we contacted this customer, they participated, we shouldn't contact them again for 3 months. So maybe shortening that 6-month timeline to maybe 3 months. So there's no like hard and fast rule that I know on this, but in general, from what I know of like in, consumer companies, 6 months to a year is, you know, pretty good standard. For us, I'm going to shoot for 3 months. Sorry, that's a little bit of a vague answer, but it's from what I'm not entirely sure if people have figured that out yet. And so we're going to experiment and try.
I can imagine that it also kind of depends on how big your pool is too. And that might,
Yes.
like if you're a small startup with 2 customers, you might be talking to them pretty regularly.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So for your company, do you use any tools to track participation and frequency across everybody that's doing recruitment?
Yeah, this is something we are actively working on as part of the, keeping track of this. One of the ways we're thinking about is if we're hiring UXR coordinators, that would be something where we can establish more governance around this process, or maybe you go through research in order to do recruitment. Though I'm not sure if that will, that's it's been such a long-standing way for people to recruit. I'm not sure if that will actually happen. But right now, what we do is, at least because we started doing incentives, that's one way for us to track what people are recruiting, who they're recruiting, because I can see that. But as far as like ensuring that we don't message the same people again, we need to establish a system for that. So I don't really have a great example of ways of doing that. I would say, because Braze is a platform that lets you to send campaigns to users, it automatically has functionality built in where you can set frequency capping, or like, I'm not going to contact this person for this often. So if we're sending like intercept messages to people, we can do that, which is great. But for other forms of outreach, that requires to be a little more manual of a process.
This question is kind of similar, but I'm not sure if the answer is the same or different. But are you using any tools to send research invites and track the number of touch points? Like how does it work with the scheduling and sending of invites to folks?
Right now, it's a very manual process. And I kind of gave examples. We might go through success agents. They might email. We might go through an intercept and send them a message that way. We might recruit via like our Slack channel or something else. So there's no one way. This is something I would love to. So there's a lot of different tools out there that are trying to solve for this, and something we would like to do too. I know Rally is a new startup that is trying to solve for this. You could check them out at Rally UXR. It's a tool that we've looked at for basically helping with schedule, connecting to customer success agents, and basically going through that flow and keeping track of everything. I know User Interviews also has something called Research Hub. I know a little less about that, but it does something very similar, where it's trying to automate this manual process of recruiting and keeping track. So if you're interested, those are great tools to look at.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, there's a couple of questions around incentives, lots of curiosity around incentives. And I guess one is, what would be the standard incentive that you guys provide for B2B research studies? What's the going rate?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a lot of calculators out there, which I relied on. I looked at a bunch of different calculators, not to throw User Interviews up again, but they have a good calculator. I believe respondent.io has a good calculator, and there might, I'm trying to remember, there's another site that has a pretty good calculator for talking to professionals. And generally, we've settled on, it's about the amount of time you're spending. Everything right now is pretty remote, so we don't really include in-person versus remote right now, but that would factor in the type of study that you're doing. So I don't know my specific numbers, but let me think. I think for like a 30-minute session, it could be wrong, but I think we did for an interview, 50 minutes, or excuse me, $50 or $60, up to like $100 for an hour-long one. Some recommend higher than that, so you might want to see what your budget is first. We just built out our incentive program and are still testing out what works and what doesn't. So figuring out for ourselves what kind of amount will work, but that's generally what we do. For a research program with participants being part of it, depending on the number of sessions, it can go up to $300 that they would receive at the end. So if they're participating in multiple sessions, something along those lines, $300 to $350. Yeah, and if it's a different project altogether, maybe you're doing a diary study. We don't have a set number for that yet, but it would definitely be something higher if they're doing something that requires repeated touch points.
Yeah, I can also imagine that depending on which business you're in and what your users pay looks like, it could go up or down based on that. If you're talking about, I don't know, lawyers or other really super professionals that are paid really high, their time might be worth more, and it might be a little bit more expensive to get them away from their day-to-day.
Definitely. Yeah. If you're talking to, doctors and healthcare lawyers, yeah, keep that in mind for your incentive amounts. Ours are marketers, and we take into account how much a marketer might make. Sometimes we need people who are a little more like VP level and above. So we might, if we have a specific study that way, we would increase the incentive amount. So case by case in that way. But as a general rule, the numbers I gave.
Awesome. Still kind of on the lines of incentives, there's a question in the chat on, is offering a discount on the company's product or services acceptable as a research incentive? And have you ever dealt with that?
I have not dealt with that. We have a whole team that does pricing and packaging at Braze, so I have not brought that up. If I, just thinking on the fly here, I would say I would say they would have to participate in a pretty lengthy research session in order for us to do that, or be part of maybe a panel or something that we would try to develop. But yeah, I don't have any experience doing that. I think it also depends on the size of your B2B organization. You might be able to do that at a smaller place if you're offering a smaller tool. Our tool is pretty enterprise and pretty big, and pretty expensive. So not currently, but I imagine depending on your organization, that could be an interesting way to get people.
Yeah. Coming from a group of researchers, it's not surprising that this next question came up around bias. What are your thoughts on incentives affecting kind of a biased response?
Yeah, I mean, this is like an age-old question. So that's where I came, I start with, we should just pay people for their time. Yes, incentives might introduce some bias into your study. I would say, like I said, if you don't offer incentives, I think it's okay. Yes, you're going to get more participants with incentives. Studies show that. But ultimately, B2B users, like I said, are pretty invested in making the product better. And so I don't know if incentives are the only draw for them. It certainly helps. But I don't, in my experience, I'm not sure how biased it has made them feel. Like we still get really critical feedback, even if we're offering incentive, which, one might think that they want to be like a little more, nice to me maybe, or say what I want to hear, offering an incentive. So I haven't really found that to be the case, but I've thought a lot about this in the past and just kind of settled on we should be paying people for their time. And yeah, there might be some bias built into that, but it's a trade-off with being able to just get people. So
yeah, for sure. All right. So there's a question about, what do you do in situations where the target participant might be nervous about preserving their anonymity, but you also need to verify their job title or their identity to select them for the study or make sure that their feedback is valid. Has that ever come up?
That has not come up for me. Generally, I think people who sign up for studies don't, if they wanted to be anonymous, they, at least in my experience, they wouldn't have signed up. I'm reaching out to them directly, or if through an intercept or something, I can still see they're logged into the platform. I could see their name and, where they work or something. I have had customers that want to leave their camera off in an interview. We always ask, we record sessions, but we always give them the option to not record the session. So if they want to share with us some feedback, it's not anywhere, living somewhere. So, and if they have a feedback that they don't, I think maybe once I've had someone tell me something, they're like, oh, but this is my thoughts, but I don't want it to, affect blah, blah, blah. I'll make sure it's not tied to their information in any way. But I imagine like B2B is such a broad field that I imagine like working with different types of professionals, this might be more of an issue, but I'd be curious to learn from others about that.
Yeah. This one is kind of similar too, but have you ever come across an experience where you've recruited users for testing and they end up being false users, and how do you avoid that? What do you do in that case?
Yeah. Luckily, we can verify people in our system. Like if we're recruiting our own customer base, like I can verify that they work at Braze, that they use the platform. So they're going to be some people, I don't have an issue with that. Or if like, have they used a certain part of the product? We can even probably tell that from their responses, especially if we're reaching out to them through customer success. They know these people and what they've been doing too. Now, in the terms of lookalike audience, that's where it could get, a little tricky. And that's where I said, that's why I wanted to provide some of those specific examples I did of asking articulation questions about their day-to-day that I could look at, or, giving a fake name of a platform. Do they even know that this is like, if they're just somebody random trying to sign up? But so far, it's not been an issue for us. I imagine if it were an issue and figured it out, I would just, end the research session early. And luckily it hasn't come up. So I imagine if it did, it would be an anomaly, and end the research session early and go from there. Much more common in B2C, I've seen.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Awesome. Another question about confidentiality came up of how do you mitigate confidentiality challenges like investigating potential competitors or being transparent about the reasons for the research?
Yeah, that's great. So make sure to let people know that I'm, with my example of looking at competitors, I'm not looking like to ask them about, hey, you use X platform, not ours. Why not? Like that doesn't come up in my questions. I make sure people in my study, like when I start out, tell them that like, this is not about the platform that you use. I'm not looking for you to compare it to this. I'm just trying to, I was literally looking for people who are in your field, basically. So yes, you could use an outside recruitment agency to evaluate competitors. I think that's probably very unethical, and I would never do that. But so I would just say, like I did, make sure you're setting the stage up front with the people that you talk to. That's not the case. That's not what you're looking for. You don't even really need to know about your competitor, and what they're doing. So.
There's a question about sample sizes that came up of, considering the constraints you mentioned about recruiting B2B users, coming from a smaller pool and things like that. Does that impact the sample sizes you typically work with for research?
Yeah, it does a little bit. So for qualitative research, people have different, you could say an interview, you could interview till you achieve saturation. Sometimes like if we're looking at it, that's not always possible. Luckily, sometimes if we're looking at a very small, we want to know a problem space that's pretty well defined or something, there's not that many people who might use it. So you're already restricted that way. And so maybe you get your full population. But in terms of sample size, we are a little restricted, and you might be restricted. I would say this comes in the most in surveys. Like we cannot get, maybe one day, but it's very hard, and I haven't seen it yet, getting a random sample or being able to get enough responses to make any kind of like general conclusions about something in our platform. If we do surveys for anything, it's really just to kind of maybe measure something that we've already done interviews for and try to get a little more feedback, or to collect feedback at just a very high level. So yeah, sample size is definitely an issue. And I've kind of come to terms with that as much as I can. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely understand the constraints of recruitment for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I know you had talked a little bit about A/B testing copy when recruiting users. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and best practices or tips and tricks for the group on doing that?
Yeah, so I will say like A/B test. So in my current role now, I haven't done it. It's something I'd like to do. We have done it in the past in my previous roles in B2C to see, and you could see actually measurable changes. Like, you could see this is statistically significant because you were able to achieve power with the number of people that you were able to actually recruit from. Can't really do that, at least in my organization, because of, like I said, limited pool of customers. So it's just generally, I would say, use it as a guideline or a signal of what's working and what's not. As far as tips on, I gave a few pretty general ones, but I think the biggest is like your subject line. One I've played around with and I don't have any firm conclusions yet, but should I include the incentive in the subject line? Should I not? How should I phrase it so it doesn't sound like spam? What should the email look like? So one I've heard a lot is like, writing out an email that looks just like an email written by a friend is actually will get you more people than the emails that are like a campaign email that you might get from a company where it's like nice graphics and everything. I don't know if that's the case, but I have read some studies on that you're generally might hire to get higher click or open rates by writing it just in text-based form. So those are some ways you could play around with the kind of language. Maybe including the link to your study in the subject line, though I don't think you can do that. So, making it higher on the page, for example, might be something you could try as well. There's a lot of resources out there. I'm pretty sure MailChimp has some good resources on this too, of studies they've done on recruiting in campaigns, and they have some good stuff in their blog. So I'd check that out.
Awesome. So last question I have for you, just to wrap us up for the Q&A portion of this evening is, what advice would you have to researchers that are just getting into the B2B field and struggling with recruitment? I know that was your entire talk, but if you could say like one thing that may help them or encourage them or help them on their way, what would you say?
Yeah. I would say, like, if you're struggling with the recruitment, it's not you, it's kind of the nature of the field. And I really think what I spent the most time on today is what I think is the biggest obstacle. You have a smaller pool, so it's just going to be a little more challenging. Give yourself some grace there. It's just a little harder. It'd be great if your organization has a research operations practice where you have people who are helping govern that, and that will help a little bit. But in the absence of that, like we don't have one, give yourself some time, realize that you may not achieve the sample size you want, have a backup plan, and get creative with your recruitment strategies. And I kind of gave a few ways today that hopefully will help. Awesome. And B2B generally, I would say, takes a little, depending on the product you're working on or working for, sometimes takes there's a learning curve to it, depending on the product. And so give yourself some time there too. So getting into the beyond recruitment, getting into the B2B space, it's going to take some while to onboard, and that's okay.
That's great advice. It's hard to sometimes be patient with yourself in the process, but I know this takes a little bit more effort. So thank you for that. And thanks again to Matthew for presenting to us and answering all these questions. Everybody give him another round of applause. That was awesome. For those of you who don't know, this was recorded, and we'll share this with you all too, the helpful resources. Please do, let me go ahead and share my screen again, get us going. Please do fill out the follow-up survey. Like any good researcher group that we are, we do collect feedback and act on it and iterate based on the needs of the group. And I know Matthew was also looking for feedback on his talk, so make sure you fill out both of those things. Our next section is networking. So if you've been here before, we do breakout groups for networking and have some prompts that help you guys. This is optional. If you'd like to leave before we set up the rooms, definitely But for those of you who are new, what we like to do at the end of every event is what we call a little bit of a happy hour, where we just get to chat with each other. No breakout rooms, just kind of the larger group, asking each other questions and answering each other's questions. It can be about the event or just in general, but just seeking advice or feedback from others in the group. So I'll just kick us off with the first question, but anyone can jump in, and I would just be curious what y'all thought about the event tonight.
It was great. I learned, a lot. I come from a B2B research or a B2B sales background. And so it's kind of cool seeing on the other side, different ways to recruit to B2B, customers and different channels. So yeah, it was pretty good. I learned a lot.
Awesome. Anyone else have thoughts or things that they thought were specifically useful?
Yeah, I thought that the whole thing was very well put together, organized. Matthew did a great job in explaining a lot of his methods for recruitment. I did put in the survey that I think for myself, I would love to know how people recruit for startups. So if anybody is in like the startup world, I would love to hear from you. But yeah, no, today's B2B recruitment strategies were amazing.
All right, Freddie, you just kicked us off with the first question that's not from me. Is like, who here has recruited for startups and can help answer that question?
I've been recruited for startup.
I used maze.com when I had a small budget for a startup company for a B2B CRM software, and I was able to, like, it's unmoderated, but maze.com, what I liked about it was I was able to select down to salespeople and then put in a qualifying question of have you ever used a CRM? And so out of the 11 people that took the survey, 7 of them had used a CRM. We paid for 10 people, and you're able to send it for free to other people so that they can, like, if you find somebody who has used a CRM or is in B2B sales, you can send it to them for free as well. And you get a heat map. You get to see like their click progression, what steps they took to get to the end of your task. You get a click map, and then you also get time response, and it gives you kind of quantitative data as well. So I liked it, and it was only $5 per response, which was really good for like our budget, split between the 4 researchers. So
yeah, I can vouch for Maze as well. It's really good for product designers because it's a very visual tool as well. And I can't, I'm not trying to be harsh on the current kind of research tools, but a lot of them don't look particularly very great. Mm-hmm. So if you can get a tool that's very engaging, you can also hopefully get more completes out of it. But it's a very much all-in-one tool, and it can do prototypes really well if you're a designer. Any designers in the house here, and so it's a lot more simpler. It's a lot less dry than SurveyMonkey, so it's a lot more interactive, and it'll give you pretty good insights as well. And so yeah, and there's video recordings as well. They support that as well, and it's mostly good for unmoderated. But I think unmoderated, to me personally, it makes the users more comfortable anyway. Sometimes they feel a bit of pressure when you're kind of just stalking them, looking over their shoulder, that kind of thing. So yeah, I can send the link off to Maze if you're interested.
Have you guys ever done like a blind moderated test where like one thing I've done is a moderated test. I meet them, I greet them, I can do the moderator, but then I just turn my screen off and I just send them the task while I'm watching them do it. And then I can like interject if they're just like, obviously you don't want to interject, but like if they're not going on course or whatever, you can, pop back in. Hey, this is what you need to do. Pop back off.
I've never done that until I used Microsoft Teams, because one of the problems with Microsoft Teams is when you record, you get the recording, you have both the participant and you, and it's like, who wants to look at the moderator? And I want, you know, especially if they're showing their screen. So normally I don't hide myself, because I think that might make the participant feel uncomfortable to be talking to nobody. But in that case, when using Microsoft Teams, sometimes I would say, okay, I'm going to hide myself just because I don't want my face in the recording. And usually they're okay with that.
Yeah, usually the way I've done it in the past is I let them do the test or interact with whatever you want them to kind of engage with, and then I followed up with a post interview, so they're a bit more like, it's like, oh, you had some time to reflect, you have some questions in mind, you've kind of analyzed whatever a recording or whatever the test they've done. So I find that that's more comfortable for them. And sometimes I work with real estate agents, and they kind of fumble a lot around with tech. And sometimes I won't share their screen. It's like, oh, what am I doing here? So that wastes a lot of time. So if I can make it as easy as possible and then just really follow up with a bit of a chat with them, I can help unpack the problems and everything I need to follow up with. I found that most helpful.
So thanks everybody for sharing.
What are your all favorite tools to create transcripts?
Not Microsoft Teams.
No, that's not the, or WebEx. That's another bad one. Dovetail is really good. If you do a Microsoft Teams or a WebEx and you upload it to Dovetail, I mean, the transcript is not great, not perfect. You still have to go in and read it and fix it, but it's a lot better than WebEx or Teams.
I've used Otter as well. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've used Otter as well. I find that in general, all transcription apps are pretty terrible, like 70% accuracy. So you're gonna have to go in there and fix it up anyway. And then it depends on accents. I think sometimes they're more geared, probably more towards American accents. So in my case, I have the problem of having Australian kind of accent problems. But I think the good thing about Dovetail is it helps with your interview process. So you can kind of move them along, kind of like in a more organized fashion. You can really, it does a lot more than just transcriptions. It can do a lot of insights, grouping, theming, affinity mapping, and all that kind of stuff. And with whatever you tag in terms of taxonomy, you can kind of break them up into little video clips and really share them out. So it does a lot more than just transcription, and definitely check it out. But Otter, I find really painful when you need to edit the transcript. It's really laggy and kind of just is a bit of a killjoy to me, but it works.
Yeah, we use Enjoy HQ because it sorry for the pun, it dovetails nicely into user Zoom Go that we're using for our moderated interviews. And you can just upload the video and it transcribes. But like everybody's saying, you do have to go in and tweak it a bit for languages when you've got different languages and people trying to speak English as a second language.
Yeah, those tools like Dovetail and Enjoy HQ, I don't think I could do any analysis and synthesis anymore without them. And I'm actually starting a new job that doesn't use them. And I'm like, well, I'm going to get a subscription. I'm going to use it anyway, because it makes the process so much faster.
Yes, it does. It makes reporting easier too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I played with Office 365 and their Word thingy. They have a transcript, and oh my goodness, it's like they have a team that builds it, and then they have a team that breaks it, and then they release it. I was like, what a piece of crap. I really don't like to bash on Microsoft too bad, but wow. I was like comparing it to like Otter and such, and I was like, oh dear, the thing's half-baked.
That's a nightmare. No.
Thank you. I thought I was maybe the only one, but yeah.
Yep.
Do you guys use Amazon? Anybody use Amazon Web Services? I know that's kind of built into the backbone of our tool that we use. So if somebody does a video recording on our tool, they can just, if they request a transcript, it goes to Amazon Web Services and comes back in like 30 minutes. Seems pretty accurate to me so far. But again, we advise them this only works best with, English as a first spoken language.
Yeah.
Great questions for the group so far. Anyone else have a burning question they want to ask?
Well, I was hoping, I caught the discussion late because of the time difference, but I was hoping he was going to, when he said, when somebody asked the question, do you have any tools to help you with your participant pools, how to organize? And I was getting ready to write down, and he said, no, I don't have any. So are there anybody out there in the research sphere here tonight use any tools to help them with their participant pool people? Like,
do the tools out there have like you can create your own pool and then search them demographically and search them? Do a lot of the other tools out there have that? I haven't played around. I've been a tester for them, but I haven't played around in them.
who's that again?
So Primata, like you can, if you have your own list of candidates, you can send them a link to join your pool. And then later, when you want to send a test out, you can send it just to specific demographics within your own pool you've created. I'm fairly confident probably some of the other tools have that feature out there as well. But that's something I've thought was like really useful. You know, you can, if you build a pool of 100 people, then you can just send it out to everybody that says they're age 15 within that pool. Or
It just seems like I have to put together a place to store the names, a place to do scheduling, a place to do this. Is there a tool that just does them all?
Scheduling, storing them, and what was the other one? Mike?
Like organizing, making sure that you don't repeat the same.
Sounds like you have a business opportunity that you could be exploring.
Well, I mean, a user interview does that. I mean, their participant hub will do that. If you're just trying to track who you've talked to and how many times you've contacted them and stuff like that, it's pretty easy to do depending on your process. Just in Google Sheets, that's what I used. I had a sheet for my projects, a sheet for people we had reached out to, and then with statuses of everybody we'd reached out to. Whether they, we just reached out, whether they booked and all that kind of stuff, and then what project it was, and then you just do a pivot, and you can see over a period of whatever months, how many times you've touched each person or each client, and then you can just use it that way. But it's certainly not as sophisticated as something like user interviews.
Has anyone tried Intercom? So I find Intercom helpful because it's baked within the product, and then you can kind of track their engagement on how often they're using, I guess, your product as well. And then you can put out a bunch of messages, and then you can track those messages to exactly who, and then you can identify each user as well. I'm not sure if that's any privacy related against you guys, but you can see, and then so you can ping them a message directly through Intercom in a chat, or you can go reach out to them directly. So I know there's a bunch of survey tools in there as well, really light ones, which I find really helpful for really tricky kind of or lazy users who don't want to open up a link. I find that engagement drops as well. So if they can do it within the app and it's really quick, so stuff like that. Or if you want to ask them, oh, do you have a 15-minute, do you want to do a 15-minute chat, register here, that kind of thing. So I find that's helped in the past.
I've used Intercom to recruit, and it's been everything that you said. I mean, it was very helpful, very useful. And then I've in the message that I sent out, I'd have a link to Qualtrics where they could take the screener, and then I can, determine whether or not they are a good candidate. But yeah, it's very useful.
I got a new question topic, kind of tying it back into the thread, but how he was saying the customer success, do you feel like you compete a lot of times? Because I know customer success, we're driven to do interviews with the customers too. You just asking about mainly NPS. How did I do as that? So do you find that people are kind of burnt out already, being like, I've already answered this guy's questions, I don't want to answer that, that pool is getting exhausted by those other groups asking for surveys too?
Yeah, Aaron, I can speak to that. In my last company, I feel like it wasn't so much competing with customer success, but I feel like as an organization, we were reaching out from so many different departments so often to our customers that we were training them to ignore us. All our customers were on marketing drip campaigns. We had product marketing sending them surveys. We had salespeople reaching out to them. We did have customer success pushing things on behalf of marketing. And so, yeah, it was very difficult to get them to answer a solicitation coming from me, but they would still almost always answer when it came from the AM or the customer success manager. So that's why we exclusively went through them.
I think I could just say, a general statement of, coming from B2B sales, like, feel free to reach out to us, like, anything that helps our customers puts money into our pockets. And also, like, we used to do A/B testing with our own customers with like our catalogs. We had 2 different versions of our catalog. So, that stuff you can keep track of in our CRM. So if your company has, NetSuite or Salesforce, that's stuff that you can track. Also, we used like MailChimp, we used HubSpot that connects into your CRM. So you can track number of emails getting open and how many times they're getting open and stuff like that. So we would also do A/B testing with like the marketing emails of like 10% off to like customer A and then free shipping for customer B. So anything that helps the customer, just kind of pitch it to the salespeople of like, if it helps the customer, then it helps put money into your pocket as a salesperson. So, and we also thrive on competition. So if you give us a competition, yeah, we did that with one of the marketing things. We did a big competition where, first prize won like $100. So, and it was more about the bragging rights of getting first place than it was about the money. So
it's great advice. B2B is such an awesome space, and just really appreciate everyone's engagement tonight in the event and in the happy hour. If this is your first event with us, please come back. It was awesome hanging out with you. If this is not, then thank you for coming before and keep coming anyway. So thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening and hope to see you at the next event.
Thank you, Lauren.
Jen.
Nice to meet you, everyone.
Bye,
See you.
y'all. Have a great night.
Bye,
Meeting you all.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.